Okay, good. We're announcing voluntary rationing tomorrow officially, but as Martha pointed out, this is, at least in our measured history, this is the driest year on record. And if we don't get one of those turnarounds later in the year, it will be a pretty dismal year for water supply. I'm going to talk about the rim fire and the value of our watersheds. This is a shot on August 23rd, less than a week after the rim fire started, of the basically the self-created weather by the rim fire and its intensity. But first, I'll give a little background about the Hetch Hetchy Regional Water System. This is a schematic of the water system running from Yosemite National Park on the east across California. The three red squares on the right are our hydroelectric plants, and the two little dots are our regulating reservoirs. Water is then transported across the San Joaquin Valley, where we have two reservoirs in Alameda County and three in San Mateo County that contribute to the water supply as well for the 2.6 million people that we serve in the Bay Area. That includes San Francisco, the peninsula, the northern part of Santa Clara County, and up into Alameda County as far as Hayward. So we have a very large service area that we deliver the water to. I'm going to talk, of course, about the rim fire, about the watershed issues for us up there, but those local watersheds as well represent about 63,000 acres that we manage in the San Francisco Bay Area of watershed lands. So the value of our watersheds to us is absolutely critical. And one of the things we've been working with many other water agencies on is how to value those watersheds. On our books, those assets aren't valued for anything, really, even though they are probably the single most critical piece of our water supply and delivery infrastructure. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're trying to get at ways to value them that we can use in the future in terms of decision making and investments. But yes, I'm going to focus on the rim fire area, which roughly is in that circle there. So it did pass through two powerhouses and burn around our reservoirs as well. The statistics, 257,000 acres, the third largest wildfire in California history, started August 17th and finally was 100% contained October 24th. Costs of about $127 million worth of firefighting. And the president actually declared it a major disaster for the rim fire area on December 13th. You saw the map earlier from Brandon. This is the Forest Service map of the fire area. You can see that it does burn much in the forest area, and then you can see the crossover into the national park area and the potential effects on Hetch Hetchy Reservoir, which is just below the word park over there. We were interested to have people report a lot of seeing maps showing the fire perimeter actually extending along the entire south part of the reservoir, and a lot of assumptions being made about what was happening to our water quality as a result. In fact, on August 25th, an AP reporter got in there when we couldn't even get in there and just physically look at the reservoir, and took a photograph that had this lowering cloud over it, which was accompanied with headlines that said, ash rains down on Hetch Hetchy Reservoir. So we had a lot of talking to do to our customers to say it wasn't that bad. But my more favorite graphic was one put in the San Francisco Chronicle by their cartoonist Tom Meyer on August 28th, which has this urban area represented by this little house here and a big pipeline from something back there. And why should we care about wildfires way over in the Sierras? And then the other person saying, why is smoke coming out of our cold water faucet? I'm going to use this lots of times in the future. I always used it at the State of the Estuary Conference in the Bay about using this to remind people we've got to care about our watersheds. You know, they have an impact on us directly and indirectly, but it really is direct in many cases. Our affected assets, there was no damage to our water delivery system. We continued to deliver water completely from the area, and part of that is due to the nature of the fact that the watershed is in Yosemite National Park, where it is, you know, the reason why it's there is mostly geologic. It's mostly granite and a lot of scrub. There are some conifer forests there, but there was very little damage right around the watershed area for the reservoir, so that was good. 4 electric distribution lines were damaged. We have about 800 power poles up there. These are not the big transmission towers, but basically telephone poles. About half those burned in the area and needed to be replaced, up to Cherry, to Camp Mather, to Early Intake, and all the way up to O'Shaughnessy Dam. We had the roof burn on one of our powerhouses. We had complete loss of communications in the area, which is part of our infrastructure there, communications towers, and a number of non-critical structures, a residence cottage, sheds, a national park cabin, and a gatehouse near Cherry Reservoir. The photo in the upper right was actually the one residence that was burned, and it was just burned down to the foundation. It was ash and piles of metal here and there. It was very hot in that area, which was towards the Granite Creek Basin, which was the most intense fire burning area. We, of course, are worried about lots of different things relative to our watersheds in terms of increase of runoff and peak flow because of the lack of canopy attenuation that would be there. Erosion, of course, is of great concern to us. We do not filter our Hetch Hetchy supply because it is so pure, we disinfect it, but that's all driven by measures of turbidity. And we generally run at 0.2 turbidity units when the limit is actually 5. So if we get a slug of dirt or debris into the reservoir, that's of great concern. Sediment and debris delivery actually just messing up our water supply as well. And we also sample the water chemistry a lot. And so when we think about fire, we think about all these things, and did a lot of work with the burn area emergency response team from the Forest Service, the National Park, as they came in and looked at what damage might be there and what kind of treatments to apply. In the National Park, the conclusion was that it was not much of a problem. Downstream in the forest area, where, and you've already heard the discussion of how our forests have changed over time, and it really was a fairly dense forest and has burned very heavily, so we expect to see impacts in the forest for a long time. On the environmental impacts of the rim fire, we commissioned a study by an outfit called Earth Economics out of Tacoma to perform a study on the economic values that are provided by the forest area in terms of ecological services. And they fall into the categories of provisioning, regulating, basically in terms of providing some stability in the environment, supporting habitat and biodiversity, and actually educational. Aesthetic, cultural and artistic, recreation, science and education, even to the extent of spiritual and historical. This is a very fascinating study as they really put forward very clearly that these things are of value to us, and we actually try to monetize them in a way that makes sense so that you can make serious decisions about what you want to do. The losses from the rim fire that they estimated ranged from $250 million to $1.8 billion. So that's a big range. But if we don't do this kind of work, everybody assumes the value is basically zero, plus whatever timber loss that was. But don't think about the value of the forest overall. The environmental benefits and ecosystem services were estimated at 100 to 736 million. Carbon sequestration loss valued between 102 and 797 million. And the actual private property loss at 49 to 265 million. Some of that was actual destruction. Some of that is decrease in property value as a result of having basically your backyard just torched. Completely. And then it's really striking for us working with our folks who work up country there. They live and breathe this area. This really is their neighborhood, and the folks that we have gone in to work on restoration, repairing things and all, they're actually experiencing a little bit more frequently serious depression. Their neighborhood burned. It's really a very unfortunate thing. But one of the things about this report, though, it was included in the governor's appeal of FEMA's decision on the disaster declaration. They had ruled that it didn't economically qualify for a major disaster declaration, but inclusion of this report and these values was something that contributed to being able to turn that around and allow for the president to make that major disaster declaration. So a little bit within the details of this, they evaluated 15 ecosystem service types. Actually, they evaluated 11 of 15 ecosystem service types within the burn area. And you see the different habitat types here and the different values that were looked at. The gray boxes were where there was actually identification that there was value, and the dollar signs indicated they actually monetized that value. So the report went into a fair amount of detail to get to these results. On the ecosystem service front, aesthetic information was in the high end of things that were valued. Also moderation of extreme events and recreation and tourism. Actually, I'm not even sure where they came up with that low end number for recreation and tourism, because one of the key things on Cherry Creek and the Tuolumne River is rafting, which basically, when the fire was there was no rafting, and right now the forest is closed and the chances for a rafting season this year are pretty slim. And so that's going to be a big hit for the rafting community. Carbon sequestration losses, again, were pretty high, especially in the mixed conifer area. That's where a lot of carbon is tied up. And so those are losses now that we've suffered as a result of the fire. But one of the things that's clear to us, and the red area is the Hetch Hetchy watershed. These are the historical wildfires that were greater than 1,000 acres, and we have had about 12 to 15 fires that have occurred in our recorded time around our watershed. So we're no strangers to fire. It happens. It's just in the case of the rim fire, as you can see, which is largely in the Forest Service area outside of the national park, the magnitude was just eminently greater, as demonstrated again by Brandon's slide of how the size of that fire compared to some of the larger fires in Northern California. So really, to wrap it up, again, fire isn't any stranger to all of us. It's part of the landscape in California, and I think how we manage forward to use it as a tool, as well as something that we unfortunately have to experience, is an important thing. Our watersheds are clearly some of our most valuable assets. The land, both in terms of its value to the water supply, but also in terms of its educational and recreational value, is really critical. And those ecosystem services have real value. We need to actually put a dollar figure on those and use them as part of our decision making. And one of the things we learned in this, the federal agency trend, is to actually include ecosystem services in cost-benefit equations. There's a long ways to go there, but I think that's the right path. And just for your information, you can actually get a copy of the report. I think their website is eartheconomics.org. And it's right on their front page, and you can get a copy of it that way. Thank you very much.